Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we look at what's really going on in the world of the BRICS. Now, it's said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, it appears that the EU has continued to do just that. Not content with its member countries experiencing high inflation, unaffordable energy costs, rising food costs, increasing unemployment, all caused by the previous 14 rounds of sanctions, they want to bring in yet another round of sanctions. I mean, it's as if they haven't done enough damage to their countries' populations and economies. Now, it was recently announced that the European Commission intends to bring in the 15th round of sanctions on Russia. I mean, this is despite the overwhelming evidence that the sanctions have caused Russia only minor inconvenience, but practically decimated the economies of the EU countries, plus the other members of the G7 who joined in. Now, the sanctions introduced so far are a long way from the prediction of Ursula von der Leyen or Baroness Munchausen, the Empress of Economic Destruction and Devastation, who predicted that the Russian economy would be destroyed and left in complete tatters. Now, the previous sanctions, far from being a stick to beat Russia with, have been a boomerang at a return to sender with devastating and unintended consequences. And far from Russia suffering, it's the EU and the UK particularly that have suffered badly. Now, the EU Commission's made a statement. It was picked up by Izvestia, which is why I'm looking at it now. And it's preparing new sanctions against Russia. Now, it's declined to specify the exact nature of the restrictions, which are still under consideration. However, the European Parliament anticipates that the restrictions may have a particular impact on the metallurgical sector. Well, good luck with that. One of the most energy intensive sectors that suffered badly in the EU. And the EU may revoke existing quotas that allow European companies to buy essential raw materials from Russia. Now, should Russia be concerned about the potential new Western restrictions and their impact? I mean, what form might the new sanctions passage take? Well, despite the attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on the Kursk region of Russia, the European Commission has decided that Russia should bear the responsibility for the escalation of the conflict. Now, they've indicated that the EU has responded to each increase in the tensions on the part of the Russian Federation by introducing additional sanctions. Well, they have, but none of them have actually done anything. So it's now expected that Brussels will introduce more restrictions. I mean, these deluded idiots seem to think that imposing more sanctions that have little to no effect on Russia are somehow going to change things. I did say they're all mad, by the way. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund my channel and my website, SCOBRICSinsight.com, to further develop it. This is done by making a small donation, as small as you like, by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Everybody who does donate gets a personal thank you from me, and I'm thanking all of you now for just watching, because I really appreciate you just taking the time to join me. Now, the European Commission has informed Izvestia that the new sanctions package is going to happen against Russia, but no further details. But again, they're talking about the fact that they're looking to cancel existing quotas that allow European companies to buy Russian materials. Now, in October 2022, the 8th package saw the expansion of sanctions against the import of steel products. That includes steel slabs. Now, steel slabs are semi-finished products which are used in the manufacture of flat-rolled products. These are flat rolled and basically used for making washing machines, car, bodies, that sort of stuff. Now, at the same time, quotas were established to ensure the continued supply of the volume of semi-finished products to Europe. So, between October 2022 and 30th of September 2023, they imported 3.5 million tons of slabs from Russia. Now, the similar figure was allowed into 2024, that's till the end of September. So when's a sanction not a sanction? Well, it's when the EU exemptions are allowed, isn't it? Now, Are there alternative sources of raw materials than from Russia? Yeah, well, it's worth noting that a month prior to the adoption of this package, by the way, 9 major European metallurgical companies wrote to the European Commission, requested that a ban on the import of semi-finished steel products should be avoided. I mean, the rationale was that 80% of their products originated from Russia and Ukraine, and now that they couldn't get anything from the Ukraine, Russia was the main reliable remaining source. So the short answer is no, but the long answer is if they ban the import of semi-finished goods directly from Russia, but allow them to be imported without quotas from Kazakhstan and Turkey, that way they can pretend they're not importing them directly from Russia, and that I think is what they'll do. Though this pushes up the price because of the middlemen and logistics, but at least the EU can claim they've banned Russian steel. However, it's not implausible that the EU might identify a substitute for Russian raw materials and potentially reduce or eliminate these quotas. I mean, that was according to Ayman Timofeyev, who's the head of Russian International Affairs Council. He said there was previously a great deal of discussion about the lack of alternatives to Russia and Russian oil products. He said, but once the sanctions were imposed, there was a considerable speculation that the Belgians would collapse without Russian diamonds. Well, guess what? The ban also extended to industrial diamonds from Russia, but the need to consider the potential risks associated with sanctions. I mean, anybody with an IQ above room temperature knows that oil and oil products imported from Saudi Arabia and India into the EU was Russian oil and refined Russian oil products, and that's where the EU and the UK got them, and they paid much higher prices for them. And as for the Germans replacing Russian oil for the refineries with Kazakh oil through the Druzhba pipeline, they're deluding themselves, as there was Russian oil in the pipeline, but the Russians and the Kazakhs did a swap deal on the oil. On diamonds, again, that was smoke and mirrors with the Indian diamond industry. So as usual, the EU turns a blind eye to the real origins of the imported products. In the event of further restrictions being imposed on metallurgy, there's a possibility that blocking sanctions may be expanded to include individuals, companies, as well as their owners and the beneficiaries of the shareholdings. But that said, the so-called blocking sanctions on individuals and companies that they've been doing business in the UK has meant that hundreds of Russian companies have relocated back to the motherland. They've given up their listings. They brought back with them hundreds of billions of euros of capital, and that's now being withdrawn from the economies of Europe and being invested in Russia. That's yet another unintended consequence of sanctions and a bonus for the Russian economy. It's said that new sanctions may impact on the fisheries sector. Now that one's going to be rather amusing. I mean, in April 2022, the EU introduced a ban on the import of crustacea and caviar from Russia as part of the 8th package of sanctions. However, as reported by the German publication Die Welt, the EU is also considering a ban on fresh fish supplies, particularly pollock. Now, the Baltic countries, particularly the yapping dogs of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, are advocating for restrictions. Now, according to Die Welt, 85% of pollock consumed in Germany originates from Russia. Now, sanctions on Russian fish would be quite amusing and self-defeating for the Europeans, as they're reliant on fish from the abundant stocks of a wide range of fish species caught in the seas of the Russian Arctic with its abundant stocks. And you would have thought that the EU would have learned from the EU about its ban on Russian fish, when combined with the high cost of energy and cooking oil, it's decimated the fish and chip shops of the UK, which was one of its major pride and joys. Now, the fish and chip supper, far from being an affordable treat, is now an occasional and expensive luxury for British people. So that's what happens when you get rid of Russian fish to the UK market. Now, Stefan Meyer, who's head of the Federal Association of the German Fishing Industry, said that Germany is also dependent on Russian salmon and cod. He said, in the event of an embargo, there's a risk of significant food inflation, as well as a potential loss of thousands of jobs. He believes that the fish processing industry in Germany could cease to exist entirely, as alternative sources of fish are non-existent. So, to the EU are now a boomerang, and the EU doesn't seem to understand that the fact that Russian products are very competitively priced and their alternatives are not. So every time they ban something, they have to import something that's more expensive. It's probably Russian anyway, just sourced through a middleman. I mean, imposing sanctions results in a net gain for one business and a loss for another. In 2014, restrictions were placed on the Russian energy sector, particularly on its Arctic LNG and oil products. Now, American companies were forced to cease operations and they suffered losses. And it's evident that they're now lobbying in favour of these sanctions being lifted. I mean, ultimately, it's the Western consumers that bear the brunt of these costs, and they're going to have to explain why the prices are increased and why they're attacking Russia. I mean, Russia's consistently highlighted to Western countries that the sanctions they've imposed have had the opposite effect, and they're having a major impact on their own economies. I mean, the majority of companies globally are not going to implement these measures, and even when they're being intimidated to do so with secondary sanctions, posed particularly by the USA. And they're not implied universally. The European Union's not tried that yet, but they're about to. But I don't see that having much of an effect either. I mean, everything they've tried has been ineffective. Now, do note that there's more than 20,000 sanctions have been imposed against Russia, and that's personal, sectorial, country, and even asset freezes, like they stole the Russian money. I mean, I know that regardless of the outcome of the conflict, these restrictions will remain in place. I mean, that's a story that will unfold over decades, but it's going to be quite amusing. But let's look at it logically. Not one G7 country has demonstrated a clear economic benefit or gained an advantage since the onset of the sanctions war, apart from US LNG. Everyone has faced and suffered if they've previously traded with Russia. I mean, the loss of inexpensive raw materials and the cessation of trade have an impact on their economies. Initially, they decided Russia's oil, but now they buy it from Russian oil from third parties. They stopped gas deliveries and then started buying American LNG at twice the price. But there's not enough of that supply. They have to share it with Asia. So they're likely going to have problems getting new supplies from the Middle East. And if they're now unwilling to buy Russia's metallurgical raw materials, they'll just send it to other markets. Meanwhile, I anticipate that the sanctions will actually gradually recede once the conflict is concluded. Should Europe opt to maintain the restrictions, it's going to face even greater challenges in the light of the lost benefits associated with its long-term partnership with Russia. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, you can help me fund the channel by clicking on the thanks button below. And do use the comments section to interact with me. I do love talking with all of you, and I look forward to reacting and responding to all your messages. Thank you.